Which would be worse? To live as a monster, or to die as a good man?
That's the line that made me do the movie. Yeah. Yeah. I think what's interesting is that possibly the answer to that is up to the individual.
Martin Scorsese. Audiences, actors, and Oscar voters call him one of the greatest directors ever.
It's been said he is one of the most compelling actors of his generation. He is now starring in his fourth movie for director Martin Scorsese.
And I think it's also one of those movies, like every great Martin Scorsese movies, that you're going to have to see a few times to really understand all the different dynamics of what's going on.
It's called Shutter Island.
I'm going to do something nobody ever sees coming. And I always loved Gothics. And so I said, what if I told something on an isolated island with a storm bearing down on it and all the trappings of a Gothic? And I spun it with my own sort of interest in psychology. Shutter Island is not a real place, although it is based a little bit. There was a minimum security mental institution in the 1950s on a small island off the coast of Boston. But there was a bridge that connected to it. And that destroys my story. If there's a bridge, I have no story. If there's a cell phone, I have no story. Where these people were completely isolated, so that the investigating officer gradually believes he may never leave this island.
You'll never leave here.
You were an executive producer and you wrote the screenplay as well. What did you like the most about this book?
It's very dark, it's very sad, and I liked both of those things. I think it has many of the elements of Greek tragedy. He's in a situation that is beyond his control. There's no escape for him, and in that way, to me, it's a very mythological tale. He's looking for a way out, but there is no way out. And then I wrote the script. Then we took the script and showed it to Marty, and he decided he wanted to direct it.
What was it about this novel that made you want to bring it onto the big screen?
I read the script first, Lita Kalogridis' script, and next day I read the novel. I was constantly surprised by the different levels of the story, until finally his last scene, and how the character resolved itself. The character of Teddy Daniels resolves himself, and I found I was very moved by it.
Which would be worse?
The last 3 lines of dialogue in the piece, I wondered why. I knew why, but I couldn't tell how and why it had happened. I was taken down the line of this story by this deceptive script, and the compassion that I felt for the character, and the suffering of all those people involved.
Those last lines actually were the only difference in the ending between the book and Lita's script. She changed that element, which really redefined, of course, what happens, in terms of Teddy's consciousness at the end of the film. So I'm glad she did it that way.
Oh, you're glad that Marty actually directed and went with it.
As far back as I could remember, I always wanted to be a gangster.
First, though, he's one of the world's greatest living film directors.
Now director Martin Scorsese draws on the past in his new film, Shutter Island.
Detective Teddy Daniels comes to isolated Shutter Island to lead the search for a murderess who's mysteriously disappeared from the high-security mental institution there. But as a man ravaged by grief and the violence he witnessed as a serviceman in the Second World War, Shutter Island becomes a place where his own sanity is shaken to the core.
Welcome to Shutter Island. I'll be the one taking you up to Ashcliff.
Part of the temptation of the picture, there's no doubt about it, to make it, was to touch upon different aspects of genre. Primarily, I guess, what you would call the psychological thriller, a gothic horror, the noir, psychological terror, humor, all that combined. The danger was not to make it seem like simply a noir, simply a thriller.
Scorsese's mind is a library of film, and he raided the shelves for Shutter Island. Otto Preminger, horror films from the 40s and 50s, and that master of suspense, Alfred Hitchcock.
I think Hitchcock is so ingrained in me that the close-ups, the points of view shots.
When you set about creating, as it were, the mindscape or the space inside the mind of this character, that you began with a set of cinematic references.
Yes, there had to be some references to my actors, because aside from Sir Ben Kingsley, they're younger actors. They have to know. I grew up in the late 40s, early 50s in America, New York, atmosphere of the Cold War. I lived with the development. We didn't know it was film noir, but it was the film at the local theater. That's what was playing. Whether it was The Good Die Young, Lewis Gilbert.
Say money can't buy happiness. I don't know, maybe they're wrong, maybe it can.
Or The Big Heat, Fritz Lang.
In Shutter Island, the director draws on his vast knowledge of cinema and uses the conventions of genre, framing and film archetype, like colours on an artist's palette, to express his vision and paint a complex hero.
Primarily, I felt really exciting to try to use this vocabulary of the past, of cinema's past, in the film, to tell the story visually.
And what for you would be a good example of a particular scene where that transformation of the vocabulary occurs?
The scenes in Ward C, where you have the traditional dark corridor, the lights are out, the gates have been opened of some of the cells, they're the most violent prisoners. He's walking along that dark hall, and he has to strike matches in order to see. The matches become like a defense, they become like knife strokes. But he's lighting up that darkness in his own mind. Literally, the next sequence when he leaves with Mark Ruffalo, and they're on the cliffs. For me, the cliffs themselves change, but the landscape changes as the story changes.
I think Scorsese's always been fascinated by moral ambiguity. So many of his films are about men teetering on the brink of breakdown, grappling with violence and alienation in a broken world.
You talking to me?
In Shutter Island, protagonist Teddy's search for the truth pushes him closer to the edge as he's haunted by the vision of his dead wife. But at the end of that, what emerges is someone who's a person.
Yes, finally. I was very moved by his discovery of himself. It's simple as that. That's what we all are doing in this life. We all are here in that process of discovery. Wherever it takes us, if we can make it. Maybe that's what it's all about.
It's been said he is one of the most compelling actors of his generation, and he is, that you don't look at anyone else when Leonardo DiCaprio is on the screen. He is now starring in his fourth movie, director Martin Scorsese, the gripping psychological suspense thriller. It's called Shutter Island.
You know, I worked with Leo DiCaprio from Gangs of New York to The Aviator and also The Departed. And now this, I thought, I immediately agreed that he should do it because we have a kind of way of working together now. And I knew that the different levels of, the different emotional and psychological levels that Teddy has to reach. The emotional nature of what developed in Departed, that was a key. I knew that Leo could pull this off, could hit and reach certain levels of emotion and psychological depth.
We had a great script sent to both of us. And as soon as, of course, Martin Scorsese is involved in making a movie, I'm immediately excited about it. He is one of the great directors of our time.
Any actor would be a fool to not jump at the opportunity to work with Martin Scorsese.
What is the bond that you guys have?
It's truly just, you know, a trust thing at this point. We've gotten to work together on 4 films now. I've been very fortunate to work with a master filmmaker on 4 movies. We do have similar tastes. We definitely know what we don't like to do. And by knowing what we don't like, we're able to explore what we do want to do on screen. And I can certainly say we're both equally committed to making the best possible movie we can make, and we know that about each other. What I've discovered most about him was that since that great relationship that he's had with De Niro, and they've produced some of the greatest works of art in movie history, he really trusts his actors. He trusts his actors to come on set, be prepared, and take ownership of their character. And I think he ultimately finds the narrative of the emotion of the film through his actors, and he lets you do what you want. People oftentimes think of him as possibly a controlling director, maybe because of how specific his vision is. He expects you to have ownership of that character and guide him. There's a missing patient, the 67 patient Rachel Solando, and this frail woman somehow has disappeared from this island and no one knows how she did it. And it seems like there's some sort of conspiracy going on with all the doctors and the administration, and Teddy and his partner are there to uncover what's really happening. And certainly the more they talk to people, the more they find out information, the more things become suspicious to them, and rightfully so.
This is a mental institution, Marshall, for the criminally insane. Usual isn't a big part of our day.
I play the character of Teddy Daniels, who's becomes way too emotionally invested in the case that he's trying to uncover. And we also learn within the process that he's got some attachment to this place, and there's something about his past that's interlocked within this mental ward that starts to unravel during the course of this film. We never truly understand what's happening. Here you have a character that's put into a situation where you find out that there's a lot more to his journey than it first appears to be. But Teddy's certainly fiercely dedicated to finding the missing person on this island, but you also come to realize that he's got his own sort of secret agenda there, and that is to find the killer of his wife. Although he is violent at times, it's just fascinating character study of how a human being deals with extreme trauma. And historically speaking, it was set in that time frame because there was that immense amount of paranoia. And it was that specific time period that is so indicative of paranoia in the United States. But I really fell in love with the story of how one man creates a safety net for his own trauma and how he comes to terms with the intense pain of his past. Like with any character, you want it to be complex, and this was one of the most complex characters I've ever gotten to play, if not the most complex character I've ever had to play.
Let's put them at the table, Andrew. We'll dry them off. We'll change their clothes. They'll be our living dolls.
Here we see Dolores having just committed this horrible crime. She's talking about her kids who are deceased as if they can be living dolls. She has had a history in the movie of bipolar disorder. In bipolar disorder, you can have psychotic symptoms too. You can have hallucinations, and it sounds like she either had hallucinations or some delusional beliefs about killing her children. It's not clear exactly what was going on. Was there a command auditory hallucination that told her to do this? Was it delusional thinking? There are some states during which someone with mental illness could be prone to violence, but it's not because they're prone to being violent. They might be trying to defend themselves because of a delusional belief. The likelihood of being hurt by someone who's got a mental illness is way less than getting struck by lightning.
Set me free. I love you so much. I love you.
When Dolores says set me free, it is possible that she's letting us know just how much she's struggling in her life. What Andrew ends up doing in killing her, he then ends up in this forensic setting on Shutter Island. That's a little unlikely in reality. He knows what he's doing. He knows what he's doing is wrong. That means you would not qualify for a not guilty by reason of insanity defense. That's actually even applied in less than 1% of the cases, and a small fraction of that even go through. In some cases, that amount of time takes longer than someone would have served time in a prison or jail for the crime they committed. What I think happens with Andrew is that he has a traumatic reaction. He realizes what he's done. It's so heinous to him that he dissociates, meaning he is not in touch with what is going on in the world. He's not in touch with many things. And this exercise on Shutter Island would be almost a depersonalization, that he's stepped away and he's this Teddy person in this scenario. This would not happen. Why is he in a forensic hospital when in fact he knew what he was doing, knew what he was doing was wrong? He'd probably be in prison. The jumping of the camera angle could possibly represent that now Dolores is recognizing what she's done. So suddenly it shifts from this place where she's not clear about things or maybe had some delusional belief to realizing what happened, because that's when she actually says to Andrew, set me free.
The Max von Sydow character talks to Teddy and Chuck, and he calls them
men of violence.
That seems to be one of your big themes.
You know, I guess it is a big theme. I keep being drawn to it. The warden talks about violence being God's greatest gift. And
do you believe that?
I don't want to believe it. And that's one of the reasons I guess I keep being drawn to these stories, because what we really are as human beings, that part of our nature which is purely physical, animal in a sense, where survival kicks in and that sort of thing. What is it really? Can violence ultimately be evolved out of our species?
A lot of times you look at it and you go, is that real? Is that not real?
Right.
The
What is real on Shutter Island? We shot in Massachusetts, in Medfield. It was an old mental institution, and a lot of it had been abandoned, so there were sort of these twisted vines over certain sections and homes that have sort of been engulfed by nature. But there were also these giant fortified brick buildings and these walls surrounding all of it that really gave a natural feeling towards the environment that we were trying to portray. And that really, it was amazing. It was amazing to know that there were even locations like that. and it becomes its own character. This island and this mental world becomes its own sort of entity in this movie. And I think it's also one of those movies, like every great Martin Scorsese movies, that you're going to have to see a few times to really understand all the different dynamics of what's going on. And that's the sign of a good movie to me, when I know that I'm able to watch it 3 and 4 times and uncover new information. That to me means that I'm watching a movie that is important and powerful, and I think this movie is.